The first challenge you might encounter when mixing pink is realizing that red and white don't always give you that vibrant pink you're envisioning. Instead, they create a softer, dusty rose that lacks the brightness you're after. So on this side, I used this red and white, and it created this really muted pink, dusty rose look. But here's the good news. I've got a little trick to share. You want to set aside that red and reach for the secret pink making color, quinacridone magenta. It's one of my absolute favorites, and it's perfect for creating bright, beautiful pinks. It completely transformed how I mix colors, and now it's a staple in my palette. When you blend a little bit of quinacridone magenta with white, you get that gorgeous candy pink, just like bubblegum. But let's take this a step further. You might be interested in making a variety of pinks like magenta, pastel pink, hot pink, salmon, and rose for your next project. Whether it's a vivid sunset, neon abstract art, or soft pastel aesthetics, you'll be able to create these shades with just 4 staple colors: quinacridone magenta, titanium white, fluorescent pink, and a pinch of lemon yellow. These 4 colors will simplify your painting process so you don't feel overwhelmed by the endless shades of pink available. Plus, they're gonna save you a ton of money. The last time I went to check the paint store, I couldn't believe how many different shades of pink you could buy. But here's the thing, creating a huge range of beautiful pinks doesn't have to be complicated or expensive. In fact, it can be super affordable and easy. So to create all these pinks, I've created a color chart here, which is gonna help keep them all organized. So here I have my columns, which are the different shades and tints of pink. And then here I have my different color combinations. So the first one we're gonna start out with is my absolute favorite, which is a combination of quinacridone magenta and fluorescent pink in a 1:2 ratio. So I'm just gonna grab a little bit of quinacridone magenta, and then I'm gonna grab the fluorescent pink in a double amount. So 1 part quinacridone magenta and 2 parts fluorescent pink. And it's gonna give you a really beautiful, vibrant, bright pink. And then I'm gonna take that color once it's nice and mixed, and I'm gonna put it in the first column here. And you're gonna see when it goes on paper, how gorgeous it is. So now, if I want that pink to be a little bit darker, I like to actually just use a little bit more quinacridone magenta in my mix. So I'm gonna move a little bit over in another pile and grab just a smidgen more of that quinacridone magenta to darken it. And you can also play around with the amounts too. So I add a little bit at a time so it doesn't darken too fast. It's easier to darken versus to lighten it back up. So that's gonna create a darker version of that magenta right there. And you can see the difference. And if you want it even darker, I would go ahead and add even more quinacridone magenta to your mix. So I'm gonna clean off my brush, and then we're gonna create some light tints of this pink. So I'm gonna move this over into another pile over here, and then we're gonna lighten it up with some white. So I'm gonna grab a little bit of white, probably equal amounts, to create a really nice light pink. This is not quite pastel, this is more of a light pink, kind of like a bubblegum pink. And then I'm going to mark that down on my page right over here, and you can see the difference between the first two. This one's a lot more lighter, but it still has that vibrancy, which comes from the combination of quinacridone magenta, which is a gorgeous pink, and that vibrancy and that kind of electric feel of the fluorescent. Now I'm going to create my final color, which is a pastel pink. So I'm going to get the remainder of this original pink we created in a pile, and I'm going to add double the amount of white to the mix to get an even lighter pink. And if it's not light enough, don't be shy to grab a little bit more of that white. So I'm going to put that down over here in the pastel pink column. And we've just created 4 different varieties of a really vibrant pink. So that shows you what you can do with this combination of quinacridone magenta and fluorescent pink. So the next combination we're going to do is we're going to mix fluorescent pink with a little bit of lemon yellow. So this is another way to create lighter versions of pink without white. So that's often a question people ask, is sometimes they don't have white on hand, or sometimes people don't like using white because they find it dulls the color and desaturates it too much. So a way around that that issue or that challenge is to use yellow instead of white to create your different lighter versions of pink. So I'm just going to clean off my brush, and I'm going to move over some of this fluorescent pink into another pile here. And then I'm going to add the lemon yellow, but I'm going to add it in a 2-to-1 ratio. So basically I have 2 parts of the fluorescent pink to 1 part yellow. And that's going to create a really nice, vibrant, kind of like a salmon, a really bright salmon pink. So I'm going to put that down here on our page in that fluorescent pink and lemon yellow combination. And you're going to notice it's really nice and vibrant and quite different from the pink above. Okay, so the next step is we're going to add, we're going to darken it up with a little bit. I'm going to put some over in another pile. I'm going to grab a little bit of the quinacridone magenta to darken it up. So I don't want too much, but I want enough to make it quite a bit darker than the original mix. Okay, that's good. And then I'm going to paint that down so you can see that it's similar to the original pink over here, but it has a little bit more a rose to it. It's like a really vibrant rose color. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to lighten up that original salmon color. So I'm going to move over some into another pile, and I'm going to add a little bit of white. So maybe grab 1 part white, 1 part of that salmon color, and see what we get. Oh, I think I added a little bit too much white, so I'm going to grab a little bit more of that salmon color. And if you're finding this tutorial helpful, I'd really love it if you could give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. So this color I would envision in a really nice, you know, those cotton candy sunsets that you can get on a beautiful summer day. I would use this color. It's like a really pale salmon color. So it has a little bit more of an orange hue to it compared to that pink in the above row. Then I'm going to grab the rest of this original salmon pink down here, and I'm going to lighten it up even more to create like a pastel salmon color, which would also work really well in a sunset, a vibrant sunset. So you can see that the pastel above and below, they're different. They're quite a bit different. This one has a little bit more purple in it, and that one has a little bit more yellow. So now we're going to do the same thing with the quinacridone magenta. So we're going to take a little bit of that quinacridone magenta in another pile over here. So we're going to do 2 parts quinacridone magenta to 1 part of this lemon yellow. And also, if you can't find lemon yellow, another alternative it goes by is cadmium yellow light. So you're going to notice with this combo, we're going to get more of those muted pink. So this one's going to be more, it's going to be more maroon. And then we're going to move it a little bit over in another pile, and I'm going to darken it with more quinacridone magenta, so you get a darker version of it. It's not that much darker, but you can still get a variety. And then we're going to lighten it now with white. So I'm going to move over some of that pink with on another pile, and I'm going to add a little bit of white. Paint that down, and you can tell that's a beautiful dusted rose. It's a gorgeous rose color when you add a little bit of white to it to mute it. All right, we're gonna lighten that color up even more with white. So I'm gonna grab a little bit more in another pile and grab double the amount of white this time to get a nice pastel color. And you can also go even further than this and create more versions of this color using different amounts of white. So don't be afraid to experiment here and use different quantities of your white to get a whole different range of pinks. There we go. That's a really nice pastel dusted rose color. So the next one we're going to be doing is our quinacridone magenta and white. So I'm going to show you, if you don't have access, for example, to fluorescent pink, because sometimes too those fluorescent colors can be hard to come by, just using quinacridone magenta with white is in itself creates a really beautiful pink. So here I have quinacridone magenta with white in a 3:1 ratio because I want to make a variety of different pinks, and I want to show you what this quinacridone magenta can do. When you lighten it with just a little bit amount of that white, you get this really gorgeous pinky purple hue. So that's just quinacridone magenta and white. Simple as that. And then to darken it, we're going to move some over in another pile, grab a little bit more quinacridone magenta, and create a darker version of that original color. I remember when I first learned about quinacridone magenta, it was just mind-blowing. It's such a gorgeous color, and you can do so much with it with different paint mixes. Purple is also one of my favorite ways to use quinacridone magenta. You can create really beautiful jewel tones of purple, and I have actually a video with how to mix different versions of purple, so I'm gonna link that in the description below if you're interested. So now we're going to grab a little bit of that original quinacridone magenta and white mix in another pile, and then we're going to lighten it up for a light pink. So I'm going to grab just a little bit of that white to create a light pink hue right there. And it might be hard to see on camera, but in person you can see all the subtle variations between each of these different types of pink. And there's so many different things you can do with them. So to create our pastel pink, we're going to move over the last blob of that original pink with even more white, so double the amount to create a really light pastel pink here. I like to see a difference between the color of mixed above. You can visually see the different possibilities that you can make with just using different amounts of white in your mix. Dramatic difference between light pink and pastel pink, and we just added quite a bit more white, and we get a different tint of pink. All right, so our last mix is going to be using just pure fluorescent pink with white. So if you have access to fluorescent pink, it is also one of my favorite colors to work with. It just adds this electric vibrancy to any paint mix that you use it with. So I'm going to move this over in another pile. And then we're going to add a little bit of white. So in a 3:1 ratio, 3 parts fluorescent pink to 1 part white. So I'm just going to pick up some of this pink, fluorescent pink and white combo, and we're going to paint it down on in this row here. And you can see how it's so different than the rest of them, right? Like this one is really bright, almost like a Barbie pink, I would say. So now what we're going to do is we're going to darken it a bit with a little bit of quinacridone magenta and see what we get. So it definitely is darker and more muted, but it still has that fluorescent quality about it because we have quite a bit of that fluorescent pink in the mix compared to the one in the first row. And then we're going to create our last 2 mixes and move some over in the other pile. And we're going to add a little bit more of that white to create a light pink, but it's still different than the original one. Actually, I'm going to add a little bit more white because it looks kind of still similar. And then I'm going to lighten it even more. I'm going to grab the rest of that. And the last pile, we're going to add a whole bunch of white. So just using these simple 4 colors, we're able to come up with 20 different varieties of pink, but it doesn't end there. You can combine them in different combinations and different ratios to create even more variety. So this exercise is really great, a great starting point, but I would really encourage you to continue experimenting more with different ratios of these colors together. I'm going to add a little bit more white because that looks too much like the last color. It's a really fun activity to do paint mixing because you realize you really don't have to buy a paint out of the tube, and you can mix your own anytime you want with whatever you have already at home, which saves you tons of money and also sanity too. I know when I have too many paints in my paint stash, it gets so overwhelming. So as you can see here, we painted down our last swatch, and that's a nice, vibrant pastel pink. So now let's quickly take a look at all the colors that we've created and analyze them a little bit to see the differences and the nuances of all the different shades of pink. So here in the first row, we have the quinacridone magenta and fluorescent pink mix, and you can see it's a really vibrant magenta. And then we're able to darken it, which brings it to more of a maroon color. And then when you lighten that quinacridone magenta fluorescent pink combo, it creates like this really gorgeous jewel tone pink with a beautiful pastel pink. And then in the second row here, we created some warmer pinks here with adding the yellow to the mix. And adding yellow to the mix, as we mentioned before, is a great way to lighten any pink without affecting its vibrancy. So you can notice the difference here between when we mix the fluorescent pink and the lemon yellow versus the fluorescent pink and white. They're both pink, but this one to me looks a little bit more muted and not as saturated and vibrant in color versus this one. It's still lighter, but it's still a lot more vibrant. And then when we lightened it, it created this really gorgeous salmon colored pink. And this really reminds me of, it would look great in like a sunset landscape painting. Those hues like in the clouds, that would look really gorgeous. So then in the next row, we did the same thing with quinacridone magenta. And as you can see here, it's a lot cooler than the row above and more of like a purpley violet look to it, but still very vibrant. And then in the next row, we combine the quinacridone magenta and white. If you want to keep a really super simple palette, just using quinacridone magenta and white will give you those really gorgeous pinks. And then finally, we use the fluorescent pink, and that is just like it's like a super vibrant candy like bubblegum pink. That's also a really nice and unique pink color palette. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, sending you lots of peace, love, and color your way.